presenter.
Good morning. Good morning. It's Friday, and we are back on Capital FM with a big issue. Today, we're discussing agribusiness with Mr. Brian Tembo, my guest. Brian, how are you?
I'm well, thank you, Chanda.
All right.
I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful. You better be happy. Huh? Stock radio. My friend here always says that if it's not Capital FM, then it's not talk radio. So let's educate, let's inform, let's exchange views so that the listener out there is better informed about what's going on in the agribusiness sector. A couple of weeks ago, I had discussed agribusiness with Mr. Max Mbunji, an international seed expert and agriculturalist. And we went through all sectors of agribusiness. I mean, Brian, from livestock to stock feed to citrus to soft commodities in general. All right. Mr. Mbunji covered a general spectrum of what's happening in the agribusiness. But today with Brian, we are going to specifically talk about commodities and securities because Brian is a structured market specialist. His pedigree is almost second to none right now for a young man like him. He was the CEO at Luce. He was CEO at Zames, and he's held some quite important management portfolios in the past. In his past life, he was energetic enough to be sitting in an office. Right now, he's decided to drop the suit. He's wearing a Roomba shirt. I don't know. Maybe it's because it's Friday. But Brian, welcome back. We are going to start with this issue of Zambia being referred to as a food basket, all right? Zambia is said to be potentially the food basket of not just the region, but the continent. So maybe before we look into where we are as a country, why we have failed to claim our seat and feed the continent and the world with its attendant economy and social benefits, let's start with the basics. What is considered a commodity, and in this case, an agricultural commodity?
Thank you, Chanda. Maybe that is, in a way, best explained if you look at the Agricultural Credits Act. Those that are interested, this is Act number 35 of 2010. They can pick up a copy from the government printer. It defines an agricultural commodity in a very basic but I think thoughtful manner. It says it's anything that is directly derived from cultivation. And cultivation in that act is quite broad, anything that is from cropping, your maize, your soybeans, animal husbandry, your aquaculture, your horticulture, and anything that comes from forests. The topical issue now, Mukula, for instance, is an agricultural commodity. Soy is probably honey because you put up your beehives in forests.
Yes.
So in its basic form, that's what an agricultural commodity is.
Okay.
It can even be those caterpillars you guys are fond of.
No.
From those trees, the ones you shake and squeeze to death. Those are also, in fact, Zimbabwe Commodity Exchange used to trade in those.
Oh, really?
Yes, Mopani worms. Yeah.
Efficient.
Yes, efficient.
Vinculado.
Correct.
Interesting. All right. So, what are the major agricultural commodities in Zambia, and how are we faring in their production? Who are the producers of these commodities? How far widespread is the production?
To start with, we are all derivatives of agricultural commodities. I'm sure you ate something today, and you've been eating stuff since the time you were born. So you are actually a collection of commodities.
Yes.
In terms of the major agricultural products in commodities in Zambia, most people, when they think food, they just think maize. So maize is just part one. You've got obviously your soya beans. Most of the cooking oil that we have is now derived from soya beans, groundnuts, your sorghums. So basically your oil seeds, your pulses, the beans. We have various beans is very different for different people. Some will say lundazi, solwezi, and all these things. But then we are also, I think, one of the few countries in the region that produces its own wheat.
Yes.
So wheat is one of the key agricultural commodities, and then of course there is also the tobacco, which is mainly for export. Yes.
All right. If we're producing these commodities, how are they traded and consumed? What has been the scenario in the past and in the current season?
The I think there's been you in your opening remarks you talked about us being a food basket. I'm actually happy you used the term food because I've heard people say basket as well.
Yes.
But we in terms of these commodities in the region, the way Zambia is configured, and I think this is historical and politics does play a big role. I hope moving forward things will change. It's been mainly driven by small scale farmers. I actually don't like that term, but these are farmers that are on small tracts of land, typically a hectare, which is like, I believe, is it 100 by 100, 10,000 square meters? So this is typically what has been driving production in this country. So it's mainly small order based, and it's not very unique to Zambia. There's someone who did research and believes that about 75% of the farmers on the continent cultivate less than 2 hectares. And if you've been following what's been happening in, especially on social media, people like KBF have authored a book where they talk about the need to move away from that type of farming to at least 10 hectares because you can carry out more meaningful farming activities. So you find that the majority of the commodities are mainly cultivated by smallholder farmers. The commercial farmers typically will stick to crops like probably wheat because it requires irrigation and it's cultivated between May and then harvested around September, October, about now. Then they plant other commodities like soybeans. So these are immune to weather effects, so to say, because they can irrigate their own crops.
Yeah.
And then they benefit from years of, applying the right nutrients to their soil. So they have that nutrient build up over time. But the majority of our farmers, because they are small, they tend to, I'm glad you talked about seed, the discussion you had. They tend to recycle their seed. That affects what they produce. So all this comes together when we harvest. We may not have probably the correct quality. There's an abundance of opportunities in the country as well as in the region, but we may not have the correct quality and quantity. So the two Qs,
Yes.
quality and quantity. Then also sometimes our farmers tend to plant things that are not necessarily required by the market. I'll give you a quick example: sugar beans. The local farmers will tell you, look, we have plenty of sugar beans in Solwezi, but you might find a client wants a specific type of sugar beans, say velvet speckled sugar beans, and you will not have it in the quality and quantity that they want. So these are some of the things that characterizes our sector and also impedes some of the opportunities that are out there.
All right. Let's see if the new Dawn government can help with that. There has been talk of challenges in the production output value, the value chain of our products. So His Excellency President HH7 talked about introducing predictability to the agriculture sector. Why is this important?
To borrow his phrase, very important.
Very important.
Very important.
Molecular.
Because yesterday he said something interesting, and I think this is what is exciting about one of the things that's exciting about the new administration is that maybe firstly and foremost, he's a farmer, a successful farmer himself. He's a successful businessman, so obviously he understands these things. But further than that, yesterday he said he made a very inconspicuous but significant statement when he stated that we need to move away from looking at the Congolese as smugglers but as customers.
Yes, I remember that.
For a long time, I think we've ignored the huge potential and market in the DRC as well as in East Africa. Now, to address your specific question, predictability is quite important because you see, what happens is that when you're dealing with commodities,
Yes.
decisions to buy commodities is made well into the future. If we digress a bit and look at another type of commodity, copper,
Yes.
which is our major forex earner at the moment, you don't just wake up today and say, I want to go and buy copper. You find that production is based on pricing well into the future. Almost next door in South Africa, we at the JSC, for instance, you see deliveries of commodities up to May, even for commodities that haven't been planted. But there's pricing for that. So when you are predictable, people can actually invest money into taking positions in your commodities into the future. And we move towards a situation where before you plant, you actually know what the direction of prices will be. But if it's time to harvest, you get a shift in policy. What ends up happening is that you have a situation where you start creating competition for yourselves. You won't believe that when we had an opportunity to supply East Africa and we still didn't have our act together, we created an opportunity for Brazil and Mexico to supply to Africa. And in the process, we created competition so far away. And the next season or the next time that you decide, say, right now you can export, people have already taken positions.
Yes.
So the markets do not like uncertainty and they punish it terribly. And I think we've been on the receiving end of that.
We've been whacked quite a couple of
Yes.
times, yes. Okay, let's continue on that trajectory. Let's change it a bit. Let's get it a bit technical and see how we can help the sector. It is said part of the solution is an operational commodities exchange. So, for instance, we used to see you see Ethiopia as a hungry country in the past, but now we read about their strides in the successful ECX, their commodity exchange. Zimbabwe recently launched their Mercantile Exchange, and I spoke about it with Max Mbunji when he was here. South Africa has the famous suffix. We've got our all-weather friend who keeps coming to help here. It's a division of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, but it's very advanced. Zambia has had ZAMES. You once was the head of that institution, Brian. Tell us what is a commodity exchange and what is important. What's its important role and in developing the agri sector and the economy at large?
In simple terms, an exchange is merely a marketing place. It's a trading place. It probably differs from your ordinary marketplace in the sense that it's got rules and regulations. It's a place that trades what we refer to as standardized contracts. So, when you're trading, say, a maize contract, as an example, it will have a specific quantity attached to it. It might be a parcel of 10 tons. There will be quality specifications. Someone might be wanting to buy, say, grade A maize.
Yes.
And then also it will have, specific delivery periods, whether that commodity or quantity is required in weekly deliveries of a specific amount, as well as when payment to be made. And everyone who participates on that market ensures that they stick to those regulations and that there is trust. and structure. Then one interesting feature about a commodities exchange is that it allows for, let's call it anonymous trade.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to know you, Chanda, to trade with you. You actually don't need to know who's buying your copper. Whether you differed some time back in school, it doesn't matter. You will trade. Why? Because you know that when it comes to getting paid, you will get paid. And if you are the one buying, you know you will get the commodity that you want to buy,
Yes.
and so on. This is what an example of what we call a structured market. It's an organized place.
All right. I see the way you've explained what happens regarding one commodity. Maize. It's got title. It's got time. It's got place. It's got um, for us to move on. I want to find out something. You were actively involved in developing the WRS,
Hmm.
the warehouse receipt system, as part of the solution to the challenges faced in the agri sector, which we keep having this every year.
Yeah.
Talk to me about this. What is it in a practical way? Let us discuss money, which we have not realized from the sale of maize, non-exports, as well as storage losses, because it all
So
involves
interrelated.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, if the best way to actually understand the warehouse receipt system, then again, it depends on how old you are. If I use this example, there was once a time in Zambia when you walked to the bank, you made a deposit or withdrawal, and they stamped a little book.
Mm-hmm.
But now that has been reduced to this shiny card with a chip.
Mm-hmm.
Now we, instead of inserting it in the machine, we even tap it
Yeah.
because there's COVID and all these things. You can even use your phone now. So with the warehouse receipt system, what it is, it's a system, of course. It's a network of different units. But I think one of the key features of it is that you have a series of what we call certified warehouses. So, in I hope that as we discuss this, listeners will see the opportunities that this brings, especially the youth.
Okay.
Because when we talk about a network of warehouses, if you have a piece of land somewhere in a production area,
Mm-hmm.
you might actually, instead of putting up maybe shops and flats, you might say, oh, let me put up warehouses,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So it creates the warehouse industry or business, which you can now certify. By certifying under the Agricultural Credits Act, you become authorized to issue this document called the warehouse receipt. So people can come with their specific commodities, maybe soybeans, groundnuts, or whatever it is, deposit in that particular storage space.
Yes.
You, as the owner of as the operator of the certified storage space, obviously you charge fees.
Mm-hmm.
You charge affordable monthly storage fees, you fumigate, you are insured, and all these things. So what it does, it stops, especially for our small farmers,
Mm-hmm.
piling up their commodities at farm gate, in shop corridors. I'm sure as you travel the country, you've seen this before
Yes,
during
yes, yes,
harvest,
yes.
and then incurring losses in terms of theft, fire, rain damage or weather damage, and so on. So you sleep easy because you've delivered this commodity,
Mm-hmm.
and you may have, depending on what your needs are, a physical document or an electronic, indication that you have this commodity in the right quality, in the right quantity, in a specific location. Then you can now go about and look for a market or indeed trade on the commodity exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So the warehouse receipt system creates this structure, this secure structure, tried and trusted, uh, working very well in other places, that guarantees that the two Qs, the quality and quantity,
Mm-hmm.
are actually as stated. And you go about and trade without actually moving around from one buyer to the next with a cantallope of commodity.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Warehouse receipting. Let's talk about the how it has been received.
Mhm.
and the practical side of implementing this in our country. How have we gone with this?
It's been slow. I mean, it's for several reasons. When you look at the history of this particular warehouse receipt system, it actually goes back as far as 2001.
Mhm.
I think, again, I don't know if you ever heard of an institution called ZACA.
Mhm.
I think it was called the Zambia Agricultural Commodity Agency, USAID funded project.
Yes, that's
It,
one
it
before Zamis.
Yes, it actually it existed between 2001 2006, and they used to actually certify or test FRA purchases.
Mhm.
FRA never did its own quality tests and all these things then.
Mhm.
ZACA specifically did that. Then they also tried to encourage um, the warehouse receipt system, but there was no specific legislation. ZAMES came in and also now kind of ramped up and linked to standards, grades and standards. You had now the market,
Mhm.
which was the actual commodities exchange. So that's been the trajectory. But as a private sector, Zambia is unique in a nice way, in the sense that the private sector for some time were allowed to actually run with the ideas. Remember, we had the liberalized economy in 91 and so on. So you could do what you thought, was good for the industry, provided it was within the law. So this is what was going on. But in the process, the government was left behind. So this is why when you ask, why has it, how has been the impact on the market, how has been the response? It started picking up, but in the same vein, left the government behind. Now, why is government important? Policy
Yes.
and the legal framework. So it reached its natural ceiling in the sense that there are certain things that needed to be put in place. For instance, the financial sector said, "Wonderful, but we are worried. Is this does this give me title?" So, in other words, if you stored commodity, the law at the time did not recognize that title that you had to that commodity.
Mhm.
So we needed certain changes to the law. And that only came into place when this act repealed the 1995 Act in 2010. And then as acts are passed, there are certain measures that need to be put in place. So it took another 4 years for the government to appoint ZAMES to start the process of certification. So, in a nutshell, it's the awareness about the warehouse receipt system has been quite low, and the various actors have been very reluctant to actually participate.
11 years
Yes,
later,
yes,
2021,
we're still talking about
you
it.
talked about 2010. Yes, 11 years later.
Mm.
Zamis is a very powerful instrument. Why has there not been a buy-in?
It's what I alluded to. You can't think for a moment. um, you are loose and you want to encourage buying and selling of shares to, let's say, the international community.
Mhm.
Then, a law is passed or a restriction is passed which says, foreigners can't own shares in Zambian companies. How are you going to operate the exchange? So specifically with ZAMES, when you go back again to our economic history, you will note that 2019 there was a ban that was imposed. Maybe ban, from the operational point of view is not the correct word.
Mm.
A restriction. You can't export maize. There's restriction on soya beans. And you as a farmer,
Mhm.
using your own money, or probably borrowed from any commercial bank, you decided to plant this commodity so that you can export. And then there's this particular caveat, restriction. So you are forced to find a buyer domestically.
Yeah.
So that distorts, I think, the open trade. And I guess this is why the signal has been clear. I hope instead of us and listeners waiting to see the government walk the talk.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps we should start now actively pursuing what they've said and remind them this is what you said. So when statements are made like we want you to look at our neighbors not as smugglers but as customers, and that government is setting up or has set up a ministry for small business, and that you can go out there and trade and bring forex back into the country. We should actually embrace that, and it's important for the development of the commodity exchange. And maybe, sorry to belabor this point, Chanda, but it's again very important.
That's very
Very
important.
important. We're catching on. If you look at from an economic point of view, if you look at developed economies, the so-called industrialized world,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at their history, before industrialization, there was an agricultural revolution,
Mm-hmm.
which led to production of food, increase in numbers. It's very well known economic theory.
Mm-hmm.
People settled, they sought ways of better carrying out their processes. Industries were born,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. And Zambia, guess what, is talking about industrialization. And we've been at this agricultural thing for a long time. So it's high time that we now embrace it and look at agriculture as business.
Okay. Trick question.
Mm,
From a farmers and traders perspective regarding ZAMES,
yeah.
is there a fear of transparency?
Where, in my own view, I mean, where there is transparency, of course, maybe let me start from an opaque market.
Mm-hmm.
There is asymmetry of information.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm looking for a phone, I know that probably if I went to a shop in Cairo Road, I can buy it at 500 kwacha, and Chanda is willing to buy it at 1.5. I can make 1,000 kwacha in a day by bringing you that commodity. So when you say publish your prices or start advertising or this and that, of course, some people go in a corner and say, hey, they are eating into our margins. So there will be, it's natural that I think where you've had an opaque market for a long time, there are those that profit
Mm-hmm.
on the, lack of availability of information.
Mm-hmm.
So it's inevitable that you will have pockets of people that actually are resistant to change. But I think the bigger picture as you move forward is that when you are more transparent, it does reduce costs, and it also gives you access and exposure to markets that you probably didn't even know existed. So overall, it's a good thing.
It's a good thing. Okay, I'm gonna ask you another question. This one's gonna have a direct bearing on H87 and his economic advisor and his team.
Mm,
Um, HH is a farmer, businessman, economist, so he understands the economics around agribusiness. Do you think now that we've got certain right elements in the government setup, there will be political will to finally deliver ZAMES and the warehouse receipt system?
I really do not.
Or what would you
Yes.
like to see?
Look, there are several things that this government needs to do. One of the things, I think it's a very good pronouncement. I think you remember, Chanda, we used to probably even beg to say, look, just even make a pronouncement. So the pronouncements are good, but I think beyond pronouncements, there are certain things that we need to see that actually go into place. One of the things, for instance, for me, is some time back, the Zambia Bureau of Standards was strengthened.
Mhm.
It can do a lot of tests now. Some tests in the medical sector, we got to hear about some of the tests that they can do.
Mhm.
But I think on the commodity side,
Mhm.
they are now able to do a lot more than what they used to. Because if you look at um, our country right now, there are probably about three quality standards that are used for commodities. Let's talk about the grains in specific terms. You'll find that there's a Zambia Bureau of Standard quality specification. I'll use maize because that's what most people relate with. Then there's also Zames has got its own quality specification. And the reason why Zames came up with its own is because the process of getting the Zambia Bureau of Standard 1 aligned with what the market was using is a bit lengthy because it's a regulated process. People have to meet stakeholders and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And maybe at the time there was no money for that. So Zames met stakeholders, and guess what? If you go around trading, when someone tells you they're buying grade A maize, they're actually testing it based on the Zames standard specification.
Yeah.
Then, because of the opaque nature of our market, you have people creating these grades which do not exist. For instance, if someone is buying maize from your grandmother or your brother and sister somewhere out there, they call it small scale.
Small scale maize.
So they actually even assign a price for that. There's no such grade as small scale. It's a created, probably a mischievously created grade, probably meant to disadvantage or to fill a gap or to really define a commodity that does not go through any checks, as small scale, meaning that the buyer will have to clean it up, remove the chaff, and then, meet the specification. So we need, as a specific,
Yes.
to have bodies like the Bureau of Standards take charge and actually develop a standard for, the country. Then as they develop that standard, probably have dialogue with the region. East Africa community, they are very active, probably even the Southern African region, so that we have a standard which allows us to export to anywhere on the continent and know that you meet the parameters. Because you might have grade A maize in Zambia, but the buyer from Tanzania will say, this parameter is wrong, So if you're keeping maize, for instance, in a silo, the moisture content limit is 14.5. But if you're keeping it in a bag, it's 12.5. So you have these little but significant mismatches, and they cost money.
Yes.
When your commodity arrives at the buyer's premises, they may actually, levy a discount on you for giving a grade that is lower than what they wanted. So a specific would be probably ramp up the role of the Zambia Bureau of Standards. Why do I mention the Zambia Bureau of Standards? Because it's these standards body, so to say. And if there's a dispute, my lawyer friends probably want to rush to court, but even if they did that, what is the reference laboratory? Who determines what the actual commodity quality grade is? So you also need that reference lab, which can be the Zambia Bureau of Standards, because it's more or less a neutral body. Then we also need some legal reforms. We have various pieces of legislation which are not talking to each other. I mentioned the Agricultural Credits Act, creating the warehouse receipt system, and so on and so forth. Then you have the Securities Act, which is a 2016 act, which actually calls the warehouse receipt a security, a financial security, which is interesting, but does not actually go further by looking at the market which actually creates it. Okay. Then in the same year, 2016, we had the Movable Security Interest Property Act, which requires that you register your security interest. So if you have, and the warehouse receipt again is listed in there as one of the instruments that needs to be registered. So if you have a warehouse receipt, you're a financial institution, you have interest in it, you can register that under that act. So we need these acts to start talking to each other so that we remove the gaps.
I want to take you back a bit to legal reforms. predominantly the legislation has been sorted. All right. You remember the one minister that, in my opinion, I thought did a lot for.
We should mention his name.
Yes, I'm going to mention his name.
Wilbur.
His name is Wilbur Simusa.
Yes.
This man came to a meeting and said,
I'll put my head on the chopping board
exactly.
For Zambia, yes.
He qualified it further by saying, speak now.
Yes, or forever
hold your peace.
Absolutely.
I am an engineer and I know nothing, so speak now.
Yes.
And a few weeks down the line, what happened? You remember what happened?
Yes.
Everything just started working.
Yes.
We need more people like that. What I want to find out from you is that, do you think the powers that be will implore the financial sector to take up the WRS and actually practically work with it?
One of the, it's an important question, Chanda. One of the challenges, and it's also one of the things that need to be actively pursued or implemented, is the issue of the, let's call it the reluctance of the financial sector. Zambia is an interesting place because of our liberal market practices. We've got financial institutions which have which are headquartered in markets where these instruments are not strange. So, for instance, we do not want, I don't think you want me to sell, so I will not. But there are some banks from South Africa, for instance, which have very strong departments that deal in, warehouse receipt financing, collateral management, and so on and so forth, and understand warehousing. So I do not see why that capacity, with the right policy framework here, cannot be encouraged to come to Zambia. So what happens is that once you create an opportunity, it will be natural. There will be a natural correction in the market.
Yes.
The financial sector will create capacity. There have been some institutions that we've been talking to who are keen to actually run with this. So to answer your specific question, is that the government as a start needs to demonstrate that they are serious about what they are talking about. And then you will naturally see these institutions come into play. I know of a commodity trader. They are no longer in Zambia. And that's the other thing. It's a shame that a number of large grain trading houses in the world and in the region left Zambia because they said, look, we're losing money. They had invested heavily in the warehousing infrastructure and so on. But they left because, their business is to put together, buy grain, put it together and sell it to markets within Zambia and outside Zambia. But that creates an opportunity for the Zambians, ourselves, to actually take over that gap. And of course, financing is required. So if I think the government steps in and continues with the correct pronouncements, when I say pronouncements, what do I mean? The elephant in the grain silo, the FRA.
We're coming to that. We're coming
so
to that.
So if we actually walk the talk, I do not see, I do not have any doubt, rather, that the financial sector will step in because they'll make money.
Okay, let's still on the financial sector. You do remember that in our previous meetings, the bank which was consistent was Zanaco.
Yes.
They'll send Eddie.
Yes.
Eddie would attend our meetings, workshops, and seminars. Then we had a gentleman from Stanchart. Unfortunately, he passed away. My question to you is that...
Are you advocating for a promotion for Eddie?
Yes. No, I think he's moved.
Where is he?
He's gone somewhere else, maybe. Definitely not Zanaco anymore. But Zanaco had a lot of interest in this.
Yes,
Remember,
yes,
they were good. They were good. They were listening. And they kept sending this guy.
Yeah, and Andrew rest
And
his soul.
Andrew, yes, from
Rest his
Stanchart.
soul. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Now, my question to you is that for this to work, regarding my question on how can government influence this thing to kickstart it, my question to you is, Zanaco is a bank government has interest in. Indo-Zambia Bank is a bank that the government has got interest in. What will stop us from pushing the new team to listen to us and say, try with this?
Look, I think for me, I try to be a bit more proactive, and taking advantage of your platform. If anyone is listening, I think they are. We as Zambians, we're available.
Yes.
We have been at this for a long time, and all we've been asking for is for support.
I found you doing it.
Policy support and reform support and so on. And we stand ready, I think, to make this country prosper. There's no reason why we shouldn't. It saddens me to read that 47% of our land is arable, and we're only using 15%. You walk into the supermarkets, there's butter from Ireland or some far off place, and very expensive. So, nothing wrong with that, but why can't we also use this opportunity, these God-given natural resources,
yes,
and feed the world? Because I look forward to a situation where someone in Saudi Arabia, why Saudi Arabia? Because it's one of the notable commodity price hubs, so to say, take a position on Zambian grain. Because what that does, it allows me and any Zambian to actually sit there and look at producing a specific commodity for a specific market.
Yes.
And making money out of it. So we have, I think, done a lot of good work over the years. To say what can probably the government do, one of the things is to look at the very things that they've requested for. There was a time, I believe this was in 2019, when a body called PARM, PARM, working with the World Bank, IFAD, and so on, commissioned a study on the warehouse receipt system, and I was privileged to lead that study, and it came up with specific recommendations on the things that need to be done, and I think that's still valid up to this day. So we have the blueprint, we have the people domestically. We don't need to invite people from very far afield to come and help us. We know what we need to do. I think we just need to, fill up these gaps where we've had these challenges.
You said Saudi Arabia to take a position. We are next to DRC here.
Yeah.
How has it been difficult for us to just flood Lubumbashi with this commodity?
It's a complex question, but the simple answer to it is we're just not configured for business.
As a country?
As a country, it took our head of state to say, don't look at your neighbors as smugglers. If you look at how we do our food balance sheet, every May, there's a food balance sheet status that is given by the Ministry of Agriculture. What is interesting is when you look at the figures, there is a line in there. I think it's referred to, I'm not sure what the exact term is, but I think it's referred to as structured exports or unstructured exports, I think it is. That is actually a fancy term for smuggling. We actually provide for a certain component which will be smuggled. The terms have become very fair now that it's being called informal trade. So where your brews pass, they move more than a truck can carry, but on bicycles. So that is very active, especially on the border with Malawi, even DRC.
I have seen that.
Yes, but Chanda, on a serious note, What drives that? It's these policies that we have in place, where you have an export ban and you put in place a task force to inspect, but there are certain sacred cows that are actually able to export. So if we do away with that and allow our people to trade and give them the guidelines to that trade, because Zambia as a country has got specific borders.
Yes.
And talking about DRC, which you mentioned, DRC is an important market for us because Katanga province is probably population-wise as large as the whole country. And contrary to what most of us think, our consumption as a country is very small.
Mm-hmm.
So probably we consume maybe 1.5 million tons of maize. This is both your milli meal, your stock feeds, and all these things, and your jiggies. So
At the most 2 million, huh?
yeah, so if we produced what we produce, we have huge surpluses that we can export. Then if you look at the last couple of years, let's say the last 10 years, what is interesting, the statistics show that our average maize production is probably about 2,700,000. Even in those years when there's been political, in quotation marks, panic, there's been no problem. And we end up ending the year with surpluses, but we've lost potential. I'll give you a specific year, 2016. When we had the grain because of El Nino and all these things, the region was affected. We lost potentially about almost $300 million worth of trade. And the financial sector, the grain traders will tell you that they lost anything northwards of $30 million. So you're talking about figures. These are the kind of figures that we are foregoing by reducing these commodities to just food on the table and to the stomach. So DRC as a specific, today probably is the anniversary of an MOU that was signed, I think in 2019, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
A trade MOU between Zambia and DRC,
Yes.
where we agreed, the two governments agreed that they will trade specifically maize because that's a key issue, and milli meal. But there are other commodities in there. There are chickens. There are all sorts of things. In fact, it even includes sugar, cement, and all these things.
Flour,
yes,
rice, cassava.
There you go.
Crystallized sugar, multicolored beans, tilapia, chickens, Irish potatoes.
And they love crocodile tails. They love
they eat
meat.
everything.
You don't. They love it.
No, I just eat chicken.
So, you have this MOU that was signed, and specifically for grain. We signed up, I believe it was 200,000 metric tons, a quarter of 200,000.
Yes.
Then about 400,000 tons of milli meal, And Katanga, the former governor of Katanga, he actually used to be big on commodities on the copper belt. Chani fisheries and all these things. So I really don't understand why, and those are your relatives actually, by the way. You only separated by an artificial boundary there. In fact, when you're going to up north, someone can even say, oh, that's DRC, pointing the trees. So yes, we can, but I think what we are looking at, if we are going to generate forex for this country, away from the hard commodities, your copper and other minerals, I strongly feel that agriculture, where most of our people are employed, most of the youth are actually employed, and where there is a lot of opportunity, can actually transform this country and add to what we do.
Let's speak regarding this same MOU which was signed 2 years ago. Competence, Brian. Do we have the right people running these ministries, these departments? Because from the time you were young, you were told copper, and I'm going to use the English used by our teachers.
Yes.
Copper is a wasting asset.
Yes.
Then our politicians came and said, we have to diversify.
Mhm.
This is from the Mr. New Catcher, if you remember.
Yes, yes.
Till now, when we have
The,
monoequitica.
the double-breasted suits. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do we have the right people? What is wrong with getting the right people? Do we have to have patronage for us to? Do we need to put people there because of patronage?
Um, we have the right people, Chanda. I'm a Cochrane Fellow. The US was kind enough to me. I was privileged to go through the Cochrane Fellowship, which exposed me to how America actually, handles commodities and looks into the future. I, for instance, learned that they don't grow bananas. Bananas come from South America, and they were saying we are always expanding because for an American on the breakfast table probably must be a banana, there must be an orange, there must be orange juice and all these things. There must be pineapples. And they're saying, look, we see ourselves buying these commodities from you in the future. So I want you to understand us. And this is what we do. So we have the people, we have the right people. Political heads change over time. The technocrats remain the same. There are a few changes here and there. What actually changes is policy, and policy direction and implementation, and also how a specific, I think, administration is open to some of the suggestions. Why I say we have the right people is because if you look at the region, we've gone to talk on international platforms. And our friends have implemented these things. I was invited once to a warehouse that was being launched in Malawi.
Mm-hmm.
And I was admiring their platform scale, and I was told, oh, we actually bought this in Lusaka. So you see that we are rich with what we want to do, but for some reason we tend to sit on ourselves and then we don't move forward. So we have, I think what we need to do is just reconfigure ourselves for business. I talked about American bananas. Logistics is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to Mpulungu, you'll be told that there's no Zambian vessel on Lake Tanganyika. There are very excellent plans to put up, Zambia Railways has very, very, very good plans to put up interlinked railway and dry ports. So you track your goods, you rail your goods to, let's say, all the way to Pulungu and through an interconnector to Kasama and so on, then all the way to Mpulungu.
Mm-hmm.
Or you have a series of dry ports where you can track from Kasama to wherever you want in the north and so on. So we have these plans. They're there. I've seen them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's an issue of priority. I have had the privilege of going around this country and looking at the major trade routes. If I am in Nakonde, I've made this trip. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. We actually broke shocks on a 4x4. You travel from Nakonde, you want to go to Eastern Province. So you say, oh, let me try out Matumbo Chama Road
Mm-hmm.
and come out through Lundazi. I mean, it's a beautiful game park, game management area, but there are no roads. You see some semblance of some road activity, but there's no road. So you have to come back to Lusaka and go east. I've been to Chanida, probably our shortest route to a port.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to Beira through there. The road is motorable, but it's terrible because the greatest road was done, I think, by the EU. But at Katete, when you branch off going to Chanida, it's the road counter rest is so left. But when you peep through the border, the border gate at Chanida, you see the Mozambicans have done their roads. So it's more of a refocus, a shift of Lusaka has got very nice flyover bridges and all these things. But maybe we should actually sit down and say in the next 5 years, what are the key priority areas? We need to connect this railway line. so that, and we need to probably recapitalize the rail so that most of the goods actually be, able to be carried by rail. So I strongly believe it's a reconfiguration and a mindset change.
Okay. I'm going to take you back to the reforms we spoke about earlier. Legal competence, Brian.
Mm.
All right. Do we have, you and I have gone through processes where we have to teach lawyers how to go and do this.
You don't like lawyers, do you?
No, I've got challenges with lawyers because we don't have the expertise and the skill they have to interpret the law, all right? But we need them to represent us when there are issues, all right? How far are we going in terms of getting the right legal minds to interpret, to understand what the receipts are, what it is to trade, so that when there's a conflict, they're able to represent us effectively? You know where I'm coming from with this.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have the right people? We've got tax lawyers. We've
Yes.
got lawyers who are dealing with specific
Yes.
parts of trade, parts of the economy. But when it comes to commodities, where are we?
It's an important question, and then it doesn't just probably restrict it's not restricted just to commodities. I think it's the larger economy. You mentioned tax lawyers. That's an area that has interested the lawyers, I think, in the recent past. There's also alternative dispute resolution. If we differ, it shouldn't just be court. We should be able to sit around a table with someone we've appointed and listen to our dispute and then makes a ruling. I mean, we have a very good arbitration act. But coming back to the commodities sector, as the sector improves and develops, I think inevitably that also falls into place. There are a few good minds, and if Laz is listening, probably in their various activities, this is something that they should look at. There are a few that I've personally interacted with who are very good and they understand. We can mention their names on radio, otherwise we'll be promoting them unnecessarily. But there are a few good ones that have taken the opportunity. And I can tell you that this is one of the, I'll mention I think the former PS, was it Ministry of Justice? Was it Mrs. Jerry, I think, if my mind serves me right? The one who actually helped us.
Chala.
No, not Eva. Eva was also active in, and I didn't want to mention their names, but the was active in other. She's one of the few good ones actually I was talking about. But we had very good people within the Ministry of Justice that helped us actually draft the Agriculture Credits Act. If you look at it, it's a fantastic piece of legislation which was drawn by people who got to understand what the industry was trying to do. So there are a few good men and women, but we clearly need more, and that is only going to come up or arise when they see the opportunities.
Okay. Would you want us now to talk about the great FRA?
The elephant in the room.
Yes, the elephant in the room.
Which we can see now.
Yeah, the FRA. Okay, so they have a mandate.
Yes.
Primarily, it's a food security related mandate. I believe there have been revisions to their mandate right now. My thoughts are there's excessive expenditure on procurement of maize.
Yes.
All right. And having said that, I want to bring in the private sector. All right. And also coupled with the fact that you mentioned some big houses that have closed because of meddling and other issues. How possible is it for us to restrict physically FRA to a certain amount or quantity of commodity and leave the rest to the private sector? All right.
Yeah.
I'm saying this because we do that. We create more work for youth, all right? More opportunities come up, all right? And more importantly, consider the kind of money we're going to save the government in terms of excessive procurement, maintenance of stock as well.
The again, FRA. I mean, they are good people. I know a number of people there that in the line of work dealing with commodities I've interacted with. The it comes back to probably two things. Number one, rule of law. There is an act, and the act that governs the activities is very explicit on what they are meant to do. Then there's also the issue of policy. Policy, policy, policy. Policy in the sense that they will implement what probably is the current administration's. You see, they are an agency. They are told what to do. Pretty much like ZRA. They share very common letters.
Bloodline.
So I think with if you were to ask me, with the correct listening ear, they would actually talk to the authorities and tell them, look, I don't think FRA enjoys being made to do some of the things that they're doing. For instance, what is their storage capacity? And where are the demand centers? The last time I checked, the concentration of mills is Lusaka and Copperbelt. Of course, there are a few out there, but when you're really looking at demand, these are the areas. Then also, if you are going to hold a strategic food reserve, it's strategic. So it's only supposed to be accessed, in my simple thinking, when there's a problem. Now, how are you going to be having a problem every year? So you are putting aside savings for a rainy day, but you are using those savings every day. There's a problem. Then also the costs. I mean, let's talk figures. I was looking at some figures here. If we look at the 2021 agriculture budget, 7 billion was allocated. Actually, we can step back and look at 2020. I think I have the figures. 4 billion was allocated to agriculture and livestock, almost 4 billion. It was 3 point something in 2020. 88% of this figure went to agric. Now, within that 8% went to market development. FRA and FISIP got between, in terms of, when a budget is allocated, there's now the actual money is released. So it's not that the entire 4 billion will come to you. No. So there's disbursements. So when you look at percentage of what was actually dispersed, areas like market development, got figures, disbursements out of the allocation. Of course, an allocation 100%, but got as low as 8%. So this is developing the market, making sure our farmers know what they are doing, extension services, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to FRA and FISIP, the disbursement levels were between 25% and 180 plus percent. If you look at 2021, you have something like 7 billion allocated. And then 86% of that goes to FISIP and FRA. So right now, I hope the Honorable Minister of Agri will not ken me for saying this, but right now, I don't think statistically would be wrong to say that it's the Ministry of Maize, because that's where the larger portion of their budget goes. So why is this? I think it also is as a result of policy and an illusion of fear that if this money is not spent and we don't have these annual pronouncements
Yes, the annual
that
pronouncements.
yes we will for some reason lose support. I think it's further from the truth. What makes I think an administration lose support is when the people are kept in perpetual poverty, when the people cannot make a living from their activity, in this case agriculture. So addressing FRA specifically, the road is a certain way and so on and so forth, it's hard to reach, the FRA can go there. Then the FRA also buys commodities from surplus farmers.
Yes.
Disadvantaged but surplus farmers. The current scenario, and research has shown this, is that if you go in an area and you want to buy grain, what happens is that you are actually affecting household food security, because the price that you've offered attracts people to actually sell that which they otherwise would have kept for the house. And these come back in the lean season, which is between about October going into next year, the next harvest. They come back in the market to buy the same grain that they otherwise sold. So I think what we probably supposed to move towards is to give this sort of role that the FRA was designed to have. I know they have internal reforms. There's revisions to how they do things that's currently or has happened, I don't know. They are alive to this fact. But I think if they are given space to actually run their mandate would be to mop up grain from these specific areas we've described, so that they keep that in the strategic reserves. And the strategic reserve, if Bank of Zambia, their aim is to keep 3 months import cover, I believe that FRA should focus on keeping 3 months of cover in case there's a problem.
So would we say let's work with a figure of 150,000 tons a month by 3 months? So it would be okay to keep 450,000 metric tons.
Absolutely. Because what happens with if you look at processors, some processors have invested in storage.
Yes.
We see it when we go around the various milling companies. They have storage, but even though they have storage, they can never keep grain for the whole year. They will mandate the traders to buy and keep, and then they draw from them over there. So they might probably store 3 months, maybe some as far as 6 months, but the rest is the market sorts itself out. So what the danger of what we've made, and I've said because we the people don't question these things. We actually encourage this. When we line up and sit and wait and say, we are waiting for the floor price. And I think FRA has been categorical over this. I'm very happy about that. There's no such thing as a floor price in Zambia. So you, the media, actually stop using that phrase. It's the FRA buying price, what the FRA wants to buy at. You, as the cultivator, can sell your grain at whatever price that is good for you. So what we've done over the years is created this monster that takes up a lot of money. The previous pronouncements were, move from 500,000 to 1 million. And what are they going to do with all that? If you look at the figures, I think FRA should have opened this year with about 328, almost 350,000 tons of grain. Carryover stock from last year's purchases. So if we assume they've purchased close to 700,000 tons this year, you are seeing FRA sitting probably at about 1 million tons of grain. Now, the untold story is that FRA buys grain at a pan-territorial price. So meaning that if, Chanda, you are in Lusaka and they're buying from you in Lusaka, they'll buy at the same price as they'll buy in Pika. But if the grain has to move from Pika to Ndola or indeed Lusaka, it costs money. There are logistics costs, there's storage costs,
Yes.
the fumigation costs, and all these things. There are even bagging and rebagging costs. Who pays for that? It's you, the taxpayer. So the ultimate price that they're actually paying for that grain is far much higher than what is announced. And then that grain, the 300,000 tons that we're talking about, have to be carried. So there's a cost to carrying the strategic reserve.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have put it at $5 to $10 a ton a month. That's a lot of money. So why can't part of the strategic reserve, this is time to think outside the box. Why can't it be kept, a percentage of it, through a network of certified warehouses?
Yes.
Where, the food reserve takes a position. South Africa is a very good example. They went that way in 1996. So the beauty about the warehouse system is that even the minister of agriculture, at a moment's notice, can actually check what the national stock levels are.
Mm-hmm.
Not announced by Chanda sitting in a room somewhere, but actually delivered in a specific location, specific quality.
Mm-hmm.
And that can actually be determined in real time. The technology to do that is there in Zambia.
Well, we prefer to actually get into our Land Cruisers and go and physically check. That is what's happening. So let's qualify that with some statistics or some figures that you might have.
Mm.
So if our food security requirements in terms of tonnage is 450, and we say the FRA itself will keep 150 and spread the 300,000 across the country, all right, how much saving do you think they would have?
Maybe $5 to $10 a ton a month.
Uh-huh.
So if you, I'm seeing, for me, instead of saving, I would probably rephrase and say, how much money can a farmer make?
Okay, let's flip it like that.
I would flip it. There's no reason why FRA should not make anywhere northwards of $100,000.
Mhm.
Because if they were to certify, let's say, 100,000 tons out of their close to 1 million tons of storage, that's 10%.
Yes.
Assuming all of it is effective, they'll charge storage fees. They can charge concessional rates if they want, but they'll charge storage fees, they'll charge handling fees, and so on and so forth. They could probably even trade part of that grain. They could buy a bit more for trade without distorting the market. I've done that before. FRA has traded through Zamis before. So there's really no reason why that can't be done. And actually raise money for some of the operations. This is the thinking outside the box. That are they willing to do that? Of course. I don't think with the right support they wouldn't want to do that.
They need to cut out the bureaucracy for that to work.
Again, it goes back to whatever restructuring they're doing. They granted a strategic reserve plays a very important role. But I think what we are discussing is the model, is the current model optimum for Zambia. And when we say that, what we are saying is that maybe we should be looking at things differently, especially now when we are told that the treasury is empty. So what can we do to sustain our operations, but in the same vein, generate money?
We've got the tools. All right. And my other question is, other than the maize during the seasons,
Mm.
Um, how else can we bring this commodity trade alive?
It's people respond to money. Um, Pardon the language, but I'll say it in a way that the young people out there understand.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make agriculture sexy? That's really what even President Obasanjo actually once said. How do we make it attractive to those young people out there that are probably listening to us, with earpods walking around in their ears and so on? Because where they're coming from, when you misbehave in class, you are punished through an agricultural activity. At home, you are told, go and water the garden, stop watching TV, no such things.
Yes.
But when I grew up, we had an orchard. We went and picked eggs, we rotated the chickens in the backyard, we went and picked their eggs.
It was fun.
Yes, it was fun. So, how do we bring back that value system that shows people that agriculture is actually a business? We are discussing agribusiness.
Mm-hmm.
And people, when they look at business, they say it's, there are various definitions, but people say it's a repeated activity that, you know, generates products, you know, uh, could be services as well, of value to someone. And that someone is able to pay money for that particular value.
Mm-hmm.
And you carry out that activity profitably. So it's a business. So how do we get it to be a business? By ensuring that our people, and the president actually, the head of state actually mentioned this, that we should move away from just production, but also look at productivity. So when you look at the seed that, my relatives somewhere in some part of Zambia are planting or are planning to plant,
Mm-hmm.
it's the same seed that a nearby commercial farmer is planting. But the commercial farmer or the emergent farmer gets a yield of, let's say, 5, 8, 10 tons a hectare. But why are my relatives getting less than 2 tons per hectare? Because they allow weeds to grow in that field.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they even fail before they start because maybe the spacing is not right. The seed concentration is also not right. So it all affects the yield at the end of the day. So how do we move our people first and foremost to see that activity as a business?
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, how do we get our people to be more productive? This is where you find things like, instead of pumping money into 1 million tons, maybe part of that money should ensure that there's fuel for those extension services. If you drive around the country now, you don't see those guys on motorbikes.
You
You
see
know,
a few, very few.
there are very few. You know, the men and women, we're being gender sensitive, on motorbikes, who go out talking to our farmers. Do they have funds to actually do that? Do they have the resources to go and train our people, visit their fields, ensure that they are planting certified seed, that they are managing their fields, and so on and so forth? So once we get to those levels and we do demonstrate that there is money in this, for instance, maize is a serious industry. It should not just end in Uwali.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more than that. So, and other commodities. I'm happy that this past season, farmers saw that the huge demand for soybeans and the price movements. So we actually see them planting more soy, weather permitting. Then the other thing is that you see, you cannot grow with a hoe and an axe. Do they use picks in the field? They don't. Yeah. So you if you are going to expand your field, we are talking about mechanization. We do not expect every small farmer to own a tractor.
No.
But one guy can own a tractor and hire it out to service other fields. This has been done before. One of the firms that I believe is no more, is it Afgrid?
Yes.
Used to had a John Deere leasing facility at some point. Why can National Service in the area lease their tractor and so on? So we need to expand production and productivity.
Let's bring in the youth. We've had 2 decades, basically, of surplus maize, Brian.
Yeah.
All right. Yesterday, Dr. Chapoto made reference to trying to bring agriculture sexy as well.
Yeah.
All right. The beauty is that the interaction between private sector is quite easy because they meet and the follow-up resolutions. Now, like you said, policy is a challenge because of the pace at which the policymakers or implementers, that's government, move at. The pace is very different from ours. All right. How are we going to convince the youth right now?
Show them the money. The president is a Kachem. I want to be like HH, don't you?
Well,
so the as one of the options. We should be looking at. I think not everyone will go into agriculture, but agriculture should not be something that we think of as we go towards retirement. There's nothing wrong. In East Africa, it's very interesting when there's a long weekend, or indeed a weekend coming up, they go to their shambas. So why can't we actually do that? But central to that is access to land. We also need to look at our access to land policies so that we are able to go out there and produce. But if the young people see the money and see the value of agriculture, and we move it away from it being an avenue of punishment. I don't know, do we even have, what were we calling that at school? Production unit? Do we still have that in schools now? Because that actually helped us. I was impressed. Was it Kablonga boys or girls? The PS was actually very pleased. They had a very good tomato crop.
It's the other one. The first one is the girls.
The girls, huh?
The boys even sell. They've got a garden, very good garden. They sell vegetables.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, and it starts from if you have a backyard, you can try that out. I don't buy strawberries. I have a small patch of strawberries. So I sell 50 kwacha per 500 grams. So it starts from there. I think we need to put our act together as a country. So in terms of government, maybe we need to go back to the land type of promo, where government packages certain areas. Of course, ring fences, because you city folk are a problem. If we give you land somewhere, you go and sit on it and start subdividing, and it becomes a residential area. So working, I think, with the local authorities, if we open up farming blocks specifically for our people, we can ring fence that and stop that from being ever, subdivided. We maintain it for agricultural use, and then call out to our people and give them support. If you want to settle in this area, carry out this activity, you can access this land, pay XYZ over a period of time. We will ensure that you have access to a tractor, extension services, and we will not just let you settle and do your thing. We want results. This is our expectations. Produce at least XYZ. If it's beekeeping, have so many hives, will help you start that. That's what I expect. That's the kind of support I expect from my government. That support that allows me to go out there to kickstart the activity. If you look at FISIP currently, There is zero target. All I tell you is I'm subsidizing the inputs
Yes.
and pay so much. Government will pay so much. I could actually get those inputs and go and sell them. No one will come and check to say, oh, we gave you inputs, subsidized inputs, the last couple of years. Show us how you've grown. I doubt if even an extension officer is even sent to those fields. So it sounds nice
Mm-hmm.
to say. I'm not saying that all of them do that, but it sounds nice on paper. But I think in reality, what we're effectively doing, I mean, if you look at the statistics, the majority of smallholder farmers don't produce surpluses.
No, no, they don't.
Less than what, 40% of farmers actually sell to FRA itself. And most of those, when you look at their asset bases, they are well-off farmers. So we have a structure that is well intended, but probably poorly designed, and as a result becomes wasteful over time. So we can reform that in a manner that ensures that there are targets attached to it, and we are able to track production and sit there and say, so how many hectares of land have we opened up through this support? How is the productivity? Is it going up? Is it going down? If it's going down, what's the problem? What should be our intervention?
Okay, as we are about to conclude soon, how do we harmonize JITAs, ZAMES, FRA for the benefit of the country?
Give them the environment. They are always talking. I know that. They know what needs to be done. And they've been singing that, okay, fine, you've now, with the right vibes are being made at the right time now. So when it comes to the next year, as we plant, we have in mind this. So let's put in place predictable policy. What that means to me is that what is it that makes the government, irrespective of whatever administration is there?
Mm-hmm.
HH7 admin is relatively new. We yet to test them, but what we want when we say predictability, one of the things is for industry to agree. What stock levels do you want us to maintain? Okay, over and above which should act as a signal, a trigger for us to go and export to whoever we want.
Mm-hmm.
I know the fear has always been that no, but if you do that, the country will run out of food. There's no such thing. We've got borders that act as a natural bottleneck. There's a limit of what we can actually take out of this country at any given time. So we need to sit down and re-examine that and think of, for instance, a trigger stock level.
Mm-hmm.
And on the back of the warehouse receipt system, for instance, I see nothing wrong with the government saying, if you trade on the commodities exchange, you can export to whatever destination. Why? Because it's traceable.
Mm-hmm.
But the trigger should be a specific level. And what will happen is that the market will, work around that and ensure it's maintained so that the country is always food secure and allow the country to trade. The challenge actually right now, Chanda, is not so much that we don't have production. You've alluded to years of surplus.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is actually productivity. If you look at 2 tons a hectare, if you were to just double that, what are you going to do with 6 million tons of grain? What are you going to do? Where are you going to store it? So when our people are productive, this discussion we're having of import-export bans won't be there. Then let them drop the 10% export, what do they call it? Is it the
Levy.
export levy?
Yeah.
Why should you penalize me for bringing the country forex? I don't understand that type of economics. I just don't. Why do you want to make my product as Zambia more expensive when the people I'm competing against, are being subsidized to export to me? So you mentioned DRC. We can feed DRC. Give us a chance to do that.
We are failing to export cheap chickens to DRC. And they're getting cheaper chickens from South Africa and Brazil.
Yes. And
We
all
are,
that is tracked through our roads. We are content in collecting toffees.
toll fees and transit fees.
Yeah, that's not enough.
Yeah.
I think that's not enough. Then, before I forget this thought, as we conclude, Chanda, the issue of value addition, because the president also did mention that. The only caution that for a commodity centric country like Zambia, we must understand that if you're a producer of commodities, yes, there is a value addition industry. But the nature of commodities is that a good chunk of it will be raw. If you're an oil producing country, you can sing about adding value to that crude. But the world trades in crude oil. So most of them will want to buy the crude so that they can create processing industries and so on in their countries. That's what happens. It's the way of the world. So if you look at these corn snacks, if you look at the price per ton of that stuff, it's actually chasing copper. You won't believe. It's quite expensive. So yes, there's value in value addition. But let's also not lose sight to the fact that when you're a commodity-centric country, alongside value addition, also understand that your neighbors and the world at large needs your raw commodity as well.
All right. Anything else?
We look forward, I think, to giving support to the government of the day. If the good things that they've been saying materialize, we all prosper. And I don't think we can share poverty. So let's create wealth and fight it all together. There's no reason why we shouldn't, as Zambians.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right. That was Mr. Brian Tembo, structured commodities expert on the big issue. Please remember, COVID is real, so sanitize, wash your hands, social distance, and stay safe. The big issue is out.
You have just been listening to the